In my university module game, name of game, um, the main mechanics are the movement for sure. In the game, you have the ability to go left and right using the A and the D keys, or using the left and right arrow keys, as well as the ability to jump twice using spacebar. Bog standard platformer double jump. However, the trick with this game is that when you use both of your jumps, you obviously have to touch the floor to be able to jump again. However, in name of game, you can regenerate your jumps by touching any surface, not just the floor, any floors, any walls, or any ceiling that you can reach. So long as it doesn't kill you, you regenerate your jumps. The only way in the game to actually die is by touching the spikes, and the only way to win the game is by touching the golden platform, the golden floor at the end of the level. So your goal as the player is to control this little purple cube guy and get him from the start all the way to the end to touch that golden floor. And players will have to use the environment around them to be able to achieve that goal. I will now go over the scripts in the game. To start with the variables, I decided to use floats so that I could store decimals and have it possible to make controller support later. For float move speed, this is the speed at which the player moves when pushing the movement keys. Smooth time is the time that it takes for the player to lose all horizontal velocity, and jump height is the vertical height the player moves after pushing the jump key. I shortened Rigid Body 2D to being just RB, so I could refer to it quickly in the rest of the script when I'm calling it. And the vector 3 here is just making a blank vector 3, which is used in the smooth damp layer. For bool player grounded, each game object in the game that the player can reset their jumps on has the tag ground, and this bool stores whether or not the player is currently touching one of those objects. For bool double used, this stores whether or not the player has used their double jump, and that way stops them. If this is false, it stops them from being able to use any more jumps until they touch another object. Bool space pressed just checks if the spacebar has been pushed, and float hor input is used to store the value of the horizontal axis, which is used later on as well. Check input is being checked called under update so that it's being checked constantly, and the move function is being called under fixed update so that it's being checked consistently at a consistent rate so that it isn't inconsistent and doesn't cause any inconsistencies in the physics engine. Down here I've got the collision code. This section checks if it's if the player is actually touching a ground object. This section checks if the player is touching a spike, and if it does, then it effectively kills them by sending them back to the start of the level. And this third if statement here checks if the player touches the finish object, which is the little golden platform at the end of the level. And if the player does in fact touch this, then it sends them back to the main menu, effectively showing them that they have won the game. The check input function checks if the spacebar is being pressed, and when it is, it stores the frame that it was pressed on and makes sure that it doesn't get set back to false before the next fixed update, so that the jump actually functions when it should. The move function deals with everything to do with the movement code. This section here specifically deals with checking if the player should be jumping at the moment, and if they are jumping, checks if they've used their second jump, and if they have used both jumps, then it completely stops them from jumping at all, but if they've only used their first jump, then it lets them use their second jump. And on the bottom part here, basically is the calculation. It's hard to fit it all on one screen. Deals with the calculation for the jumps by using the target velocity, by multiplying the horizontal input by the move speed, and changes the velocity in the rigid body to the target velocity over time, which moves the player from where they are to where they should be, depending on what buttons have been pressed and when, which is stored up here. This all comes under the move function, and that, along with the check input function, is called in the respective places here to make sure that that works. This section is very simple. This is the scene controller, and it basically just controls switching between the main menu, the game, and then going from the game back to the main menu, and also working with the quit button that's on the menu to make sure that when you push the button it takes you to the right spot. It's really just as simple as loading the correct scene when it needs to be loaded. So for my reflection on the project, the code definitely could have been written better. This is the first game that I've had to actually properly write out the entirety of the code for, and as a result of that, it has been quite difficult to try and piece together, especially just seeing a blank screen and not knowing exactly what to put on it. But I have learned a lot about the basics of writing code, and a lot of the terminology as well has been a struggle, but I've managed to understand that from this. The difficulties in having to start over in that does mean that it hasn't been written incredibly effectively, and if I were to do this again with the knowledge that I now have, I do think I would be able to write it slightly cleaner. In terms of like the level design, as well, I decided to start designing the level first when I decided that I wanted to develop a sort of precision platformer. But once I actually got down to writing the code itself, I realized that you really should start with the movement and not the level design. It's more a case of I didn't realize exactly what I wanted the gimmick to be until I'd already basically made it. So the level design that I had originally, with keys and doors, and going back and forwards, almost like a Metroidvania style of game, just didn't fit with the gimmick that I ended up going with, and I did have to redesign the level. So looking back on it, that's definitely something that I would look to change, is the order of what I develop.